All right, this is another excellent video, I think, that might help you with your deep analysis. It's basically a continuation of the lesson that we just went over, but this is how to synthesize information and use quotes, integrate quotes, whether it's from literature or whether it's from sources for like the synthesis question on the AP exam. This is more about how you should structure your thought. So first and foremost, you need to know that you don't just throw in quotes from a text as a single sentence in your responses. You should never have just a quoted sentence by itself without providing context, without setting it up structurally. We've talked about this in another writing lesson. But what you need to do, obviously, is add context, set up your quotes so that the reader can understand your analysis, which does include a small bit of summary. And you need to make sure that your paragraph shows flow and that it does not sound very choppy. So that's step one, and you can accomplish this task by using what I call the Oreo effect. And if you think about an Oreo is in 3 layers. You have the outer cookie shell, you have that luscious cream filling center, and then you have the final cookie shell. So if you think about how you would set up a quote in layers like an Oreo, you would first need to introduce the quote, tell who said it, the author's name, the title of the text, maybe you want to say the location of the quote, paragraph 2 or page 5, and then you put a comma. Then that luscious cream filling, that's the best part of an Oreo, and that's your quote. You're just going to copy the quote word for word, use quotation marks. If you didn't cite the quote in your introduction phrase, you can put a parenthetical citation here, but you don't need it twice, so just know that. And then finally, you need to elaborate and explain what the quote means and signifies. Basically, here is where you need to have deep analysis. And so I'm not going to read this paragraph to you, but I just wanted to color code it so that you can see how you would integrate a quote. Many of you know this and many of you do this already. It's just here for you as a little review. But you do notice that green is the analysis, and that's the bulk of the paragraph. Now, I could certainly go longer and deeper with this analysis, but, for the sake of the example, there we go. You never want to use quotes as a single sentence alone. Here's an example of that. So if we just read Macbeth, Shakespeare, and you are doing an analysis of Shakespeare's Macbeth, and you say Shakespeare depicts the male gender to be more evil and violent than the female gender. And here's your quote, and you're just going to shove it in this paragraph without any context. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here. This quote is spoken by Lady Macbeth and illustrates that the male gender is perceived to be more evil and violent than the female gender. Okay, not bad for a start, but you have your topic sentence, your claim here. Shakespeare is depicting the male gender to be more evil, and then so you really want to persuade your audience to buy into this. Well, if we haven't read Macbeth and you just kind of throw in this quote, that sounds choppy, I'm a little confused. So you need to add context. So let's look at how we can make this a bit better. So we have the same topic sentence here, the same claim. And here we have context. It says, after receiving a letter about the witch's prophecy in Act 1, Scene 3, Lady Macbeth states aloud, come you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here. And then we go on to analyze a bit more deeply, but it's still pretty shallow. It says Shakespeare is illustrating through Lady Macbeth that a female isn't capable of performing an act of violence such as murdering King Duncan. Therefore, she must beg the spirits to figuratively change her gender and make her more male-like so she can plot evil and violent schemes. That's actually not terrible analysis there. This still sounds pretty formulaic, though, and that's not because you're awful writers. It's because teachers have taught you this formula, and as a teacher, I often struggle with teaching you writing because you have to almost teach a formula to get everything that you need, but then we turn right around and we're almost hypocritical when we say, oh, your writing sounds very formulaic. So I definitely understand your frustration, but one way that you can be less formulaic and have some uniqueness and originality to your writing is by synthesizing your quotes within your analysis. So here is an example of how to do that. And you can almost, I want you to pay attention to the color coding because it's up until this point it's been one color, then another color, then another color. But with this last example, you can just look at the structure and see that it jumps back and forth. So let's read it. You may not like it, you may prefer the second one better, and that's totally fine. But it says, Shakespeare depicts the male gender to be more evil and violent than the female gender. We have our claim. Shakespeare illustrates through Lady Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 3, that a female isn't capable of performing an act of violence such as murdering King Duncan. And then I have a parenthetical example. Come you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here. Therefore, she must beg the spirits to figuratively change her gender and make her more male-like so she can plot such evil and violent schemes. Now, what I like about this is that it's still not it's not incredibly formulaic, but the analysis is driving the paragraph. You don't set it up in a formula. You just jump right in, you make your claim, and then you jump straight into analysis, and you still provide your evidence, but not so much in a formulaic way. So, what does it mean to synthesize? Synthesis means that you combine two or more things into a cohesive whole. Basically, it's putting all the pieces together. And if you're in AP, and if we've covered the synthesis essay, you know very well what synthesis means at this point. So formulaic means to stick it into a formula, obviously. In writing, it's good to get all the components in your response, such as like the RAPS formula. But the next step is to do so in a fresh and unique way. In other words, you don't want to sound like a robot. You don't want your response to sound similar to someone else's. Your insight and voice should shine. Again, that's not your fault because you've been taught a formula up until this point. But, I hope to give you opportunities to where you can have a little wiggle room to see your own style, to develop your own voice, and as long as you have your deep analysis and you're making your claims and you're supporting your claims, then you're good to go. There's no wrong way to compose an essay. So one dilemma, I guess, is how do you not sound formulaic? I know I have to have this, this, and this in my paragraph, so how do I put it in there without just laying it out in a formula? And here's where we're going to go back to our previous lesson with shallow analysis versus deep analysis. Vague, obvious answers don't reflect critical thinking. We've talked about that. Deep analysis reflects that specific reference and analyzing the specific effect created or intended. It does go beyond that general understanding. And so when you synthesize your insights, it helps you accomplish two things. It helps you not sound formulaic, and it helps you deeply analyze the text in an academic way. So here we have an example. I'm going to pause to let you read it, and I want you to think about, does it sound formulaic? Does it have deep analysis? You can not even finish the paragraph before you realize this is a formula. We have our claim, we have our example, and then we have our analysis, but even though it's not very deep analysis. So it's a formula. What about this one? It's longer, so maybe it'll be better. So this paragraph is a lot better, actually. It's still got that formula to it. You have your claim, you have your examples, but it's not so boring in that I just want to go to sleep when I read it. This writer has deeper insight, talks about syntax and word structure. It says that is how Wiesel uses syntax to develop his theme that conveys that he will never forget the first night. That's a little shallow, but it's a lot better structurally. And then what about this one? Yeah, it's totally a formula. He uses repetition. Here's the quote. And he will always remember them because they were so prevalent in his life. And there's no analysis there. That is strictly summary. So What does it mean to take a formulaic response and turn it into a synthesis response? So on the left-hand side, you will see the formulaic response, your claim, example, analysis. Look at the synthesize paragraph where I've basically just taken the paragraph on the left and rewritten it. Elie Wiesel uses anaphora, except I forgot the A, to develop his theme of remembrance. This anaphora is reiterated, emphasizing not only the cruel reality of his first night in camp, but also the importance of remembering and speaking of his experience, despite the horrors of the memory, those moments which murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to dust. While Wiesel cannot forget these memories, he cannot hold them to himself either. By declaring, "Never shall I forget," he sends his message to his readers. We mustn't forget either. And so, two things the student did. They just incorporated the quote as their own sentence. You can see where it says the first night in camp, but it still constitutes as a quote from the text because, I mean, you quoted it. But rather than having it set up in a formula, you use it as part of your analysis. So your analysis is driving your paragraph. And then you also want to make another point, but you don't want to spend time pausing and setting it up like a formula, but you just use it as a parenthetical example. This is wonderful. This helps your writing be more concise, straight to the point. This is actually just combining basically all of the writing tips that we've done up until this point and constructing it in a way that's very clear and cohesive and also showing deep analysis. Because if your analysis is driving your essay, then you're going to have deeper analysis. So this takes a lot of practice, guys. We're hopefully going to do this in our voice lessons if you're in AP. We'll practice synthesizing our quotes within our responses. But again, don't fret if this is overwhelming. Don't feel defeated. We will get there. Hopefully you found this helpful. Thanks.